as a Muslim, you have a mission in life. And that mission you can endeavor to accomplish individually, but you'll never be able to enjoy working in the pursuit of the objective unless you are part of a jama'ah, part of a group. It's a human nature. I mean, this doesn't apply only to Islamic projects and Islamic activity. It applies to any social activity that involves or that requires the collaboration and the cooperation of as many people as possible. The reason we have an Islamic movement, or we've been having an Islamic movement, is that the Ummah, which for many centuries had the strength and the power to inspire as well as to lead the human civilization, unfortunately started declining. And that decline led to a state of weakness that enabled the enemies of Islam, the enemies of the Ummah, to have a go at us or at our ancestors. From around what, the 16th century nearly, here in this part of the world, the Dutch, or was it was it the English first, or it was before, I think, the Portuguese and the Dutch, then the English, and then, but in our part of the world, in the Arab world, it was in the first quarter of the 19th century that we started being conquered by nations who do not qualify or deserve to take charge of an ummah that had been entrusted with a mission like ours. So it's a very humiliating experience for the ummah to be vanquished in this way, to be colonized. People everywhere, and I remember when I visited South Africa, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, what's that? Adhan, is it already?
You got a British time, Adhan.
Yeah. It's 8:30 in the morning in London. Anyway, when I went to South Africa the first time, I was taken to the tomb of a man that I was told had been one of the early exiles from this part of the world, from Malayo, from somewhere here in your part of the world, that the Dutch were actually incarcerating people who were striving and struggling against colonialism, sending them all the way at one stage to Sri Lanka, at another stage all the way to South Africa. So you see, there was struggle. People were struggling. Because as a Muslim, you cannot take it. It's too humiliating. It's unacceptable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us the book, sent us the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to carry a message to the world and not to be turned into slaves. The same thing happened in the Arab region. The French colonized Algeria in 1830, then they colonized Tunisia, then the British came and colonized Egypt. But a century earlier, the Muslims were in a terrible shape also in that part of the world. And that prompted a number of revivalists. The most renowned of whom are three persons, the most famous ones. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in the Arab region, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi in the Indian continent, and Osman dan Fodio, or Uthman bin Fodi as he was known to the Arabs, in the West African region. What you see of Islamic movements today anywhere in the world, whether you are talking about this part of the world, you're talking about the Indian continent, the Arab world, or Africa, all Islamic projects started there. Started with Da'wat Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, or with Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, or with Osman dan Fodio. And none of the three men met the other. There is no evidence that they ever met each other, but they all existed within nearly the same period. And when I reflect as a historian of ideas on that part of the, on that time in life, I see the will of Allah manifest itself. That Allah willed for this ummah to be awakened. So these men existed in different geographical locations at the same time for the same purpose. Wake up the ummah. The ummah has gone into deep slumber, and it's about time you wake up and resume your historic responsibility. Of course, after that came colonialism. After colonialism came post-independent, so-called post-independence, but actually there was really no real independence, nation state or territorial state, ironically designed and created by the former colonialists, not by the will of the movements that struggled for independence. And that's why the revolutions that are taking place nowadays in the Arab world are revolutions against the legacy of colonialism in the form of the modern state. A modern state that is controlled by a corrupt elite, despotic, more concerned about serving the interests of the enemies of the ummah than serving the best interests of the ummah itself. Now, during the era of colonialism, the effort of reformers or reformists, as they are called, or revivalists continued. We saw Maududi in the Indian continent try to build on the legacy of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi. And we saw Hassan al-Banna in Egypt in 1928 start a small group for reforming the society, drawing on two legacies that until his time seemed to be contradictory, but he managed to bridge the gap between them. And this is one of the greatness of Hassan al-Banna. The legacy of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, a Puritan Salafi trend, and the Hasafiya Sufi order, which is a mystical trend. Usually Sufis and Salafis are enemies of each other, they don't meet, but Hassan al-Banna managed to bridge the gap between them, and this is one of the uniqueness of the da'wah of the Ikhwan, or the message or the group that Hassan al-Banna formed at that time. Now, what was the purpose of that movement? The purpose was to bring about the revival of the ummah in order to get rid of all the ills that have accumulated over the days. And there's a brilliant book by a friend of mine in Lebanon who happens to be a Shiite, but a great admirer of Hassan al-Banna. And in his book, he talks about the uniqueness of Hassan al-Banna and his approach to reforming society. And one of the things he says in that book, this friend of mine is Dr. Saud al-Mawla, is that Hassan al-Banna, if you look at the Rasail, at the epistles or at the messages of Hassan al-Banna, and at Mudhakkarat al-Da'wa wal-Da'iya, the memoirs, you find that whatever his predecessors called for in the language of reform, Hassan al-Banna recoined in a simpler language, understandable to the general public. You see, until Hassan al-Banna, people were speaking to the elite, to intellectuals, to artists, to poets, to writers, but the ordinary public was totally isolated. And then Hassan al-Banna thought to himself, I mean, what's the point? Even what's the point of going to the mosque and talking to the people in the mosque? Because those who are in the mosque are in the mosque. They're already worshipping Allah. But what about those who don't come to the mosque? Those who spend most of the time in the cafe shops or go to cinema? What about factory laborers? What about the farmers in the field who toil the land from the early hours of the morning until the evening? One of the great things about Hassan al-Banna is that he managed to devise two things. A language understandable by the commoners, by the ordinary people, by the layman, how to simplify complicated ideas, and at the same time devise the method of communicating those ideas. So it's the ideas in simple language and then the method of communicating that language. Now when you think about Hassan al-Banna, I mean, he started this movement in his early 20s. He wasn't an old aging sheikh. In the early 20s, just graduated from Dar al-Ulum, took up his teaching job in a school in Al-Ismailiyah. And then he looks at the world in which he was living. There's something drastically wrong with it. Of course, I need not to talk about his childhood because it was also a unique childhood, being a son of a great scholar, Abdurrahman al-Sa'ati, that he was vigilant and he wanted to change the world. But it was after his graduation and when in Ismailiyah that something sparked his imagination about the possibility of reviving the Ummah. And that was the British garrison inside Ismailiyah. That provoked him. He was provoked initially by the backwardness and the corruption that was so prevalent, but he was also additionally and more importantly provoked by the existence of the British on Arab and Muslim soil. For the first time, we see a project which is comprehensive in its approach. So simplicity of language. Simplicity, by the way, does not mean that you leave out the important things. No, that's not what it means. It means whatever the highly intellectuals talk about, you make it presentable to the people. Then the methodology of communicating the idea, and thirdly, the comprehensiveness of the approach. It's not just, this is just simply about rituals or about worship or going to the mosque or about certain, it's about our entire life. There's something wrong with everything in our life. The British are colonizing us. Foreign companies are exploiting our economy and... you want me to stop?
No.
Oh, sorry. Foreign companies are monopolizing the economy, controlling our laborers, are not paying them their dues. Feudal lords are enslaving the farmers. The Ummah is so divided, and the Zionists are planning to create a Jewish homeland in the heart of the Muslim land. You see? That's why Saud al-Mawla, in his introduction to his book, talks about the ideas that everybody was talking about before Hassan al-Banna, from the nationalists to the Islamists. Hassan al-Banna managed to bring together and present in a program of revival. Again, Hassan al-Banna, who started in his early 20s, was assassinated in his early 40s. So he didn't live long. I mean, probably had he lived longer, Allah A'lam what other contributions he would have made. But anyway, by the time he was assassinated in 1949, he had already established a Jama'ah that had chapters throughout Egypt, that had chapters in much of the Arab world, in Palestine, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Sudan, probably in North Africa, I'm not sure, but in Iraq. See the expansion within just a few years. Why? What is the source of this success? Take you back to the three things. Simplicity of the idea, the methodology that is accessible to the people, and the comprehensiveness with which he addressed the ills of the Ummah. Of course, after his assassination, the Jama'ah went through tribulation and various stages, etc. Now, why I'm giving you this introduction before I start my talk? No. Don't worry, it won't be. This is much of my talk. But it's in a way of introduction because it's a very important introduction. A Jama'ah, or being part of a Jama'ah, is not something that you do because you want prestige. It's not about prestige. It's about helping me as a Muslim individual, because responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment is individual. Each of us will come alone.